I am over the moon about my upcoming wedding this June. As any bride-to-be, I'm in the midst of making sure everything is perfectly planned and ready for that special day. We sent out the invites several months ago, organizing everything under a detailed checklist to ensure things flow smoothly. Imagine those little check boxes next to send invites, choose the cake, book the venue, and so on. It's been a journey, and we're almost at the finish line. I come from a rather large family tree, with my dear mom being one out of 6 siblings. Growing up in a big family was always lively, a mix of laughter, stories, and inevitably, a sprinkle of chaos. The funny thing about big families, and I'm sure many can relate to this, is that we all have that one relative, the one who stirs things up just when you think everything's settled. Well, in our family, that role is claimed by my Aunt N, who, as best as I can estimate, is somewhere in her 50s. When going through the guest list, my fiancé and I were very deliberate about who we truly wanted at the wedding. This day is, without a doubt, about celebrating with people who play supportive roles in our lives, who genuinely want to celebrate this joyous union with us. Unfortunately, Aunt N wasn't someone we saw in that sphere. Out of countless guests, she's the singular name that ended up without an invite. It's a decision underscored by a long, painful history, as well as a deeply personal one. If you're wondering about the decision not to include Aunt N, perhaps I need to unfold a bit of my past. My Aunt N wasn't always the estranged member in our family. Quite the opposite, actually. There was a time in my life when she and I were pretty close. I looked up to her with the kind of awe that children often reserve for adults who spin wild stories or live without apparent boundaries. Aunt N was that whimsical presence, the unpredictable aunt who would often let my siblings and me indulge in things our parents would typically disapprove of. It was all fun and games, until it wasn't. As I grew older, the charming facade began to crack, revealing the reckless undercurrent behind her antics. Reflecting back, I sometimes question why my parents entrusted her with our care during those times. A woman more concerned with the thrill of the moment than the real-world implications was not someone to be left in the care of children. For Aunt N, any scenario was a stage to perform her bigger-than-life character, always the one in the spotlight. Life's realities started catching up during my high school years when a weekend trip to California with Aunt N spiraled into an unexpected nightmare. What was supposed to be a fun getaway turned into an ordeal filled with confusion and desperate calls, as my parents were blindsided by what amounted to a mistimed adventure, nervously holding onto their daughter, allegedly held, as if over some awkward ransom. The line blurred between play and manipulation. Post-high school and during my college years, I naively thought a second chance was due. I hoped that perhaps time had mellowed Aunt N and distance had healed old wounds. But I was proven devastatingly wrong when, out of the blue, during a period of heightened vulnerability, she cast me out onto the street. Homeless, with no one but her in a new state, those memories linger painfully. Sometimes, familial bonds aren't worth salvaging when the cost is your own well-being. Ultimately, our guest list reflects years of strong boundaries and learned lessons. Not inviting Aunt N was a necessary decision, one that aligned with how we've decided to protect our peace. When a person repeatedly demonstrates who they are through harmful actions, it's prudent to believe them. So, our wedding proceeding without Aunt N isn't just a choice. It's a vital commitment to ourselves, confirming the right people do indeed stand with us as we step into our future. While I attempted to open the door of forgiveness for Aunt N, thinking that perhaps there was love buried beneath the chaos, my experiences taught me otherwise. Our supposed second chance quickly became a repeat cycle of deception and ultimately abandonment. During my time in college, Aunt N extended an olive branch, and I grasped it, hopeful for reconciliation. She had been my quirky, larger-than-life aunt, who had once painted my world with vibrant colors of spontaneity. But that illusion quickly shattered when her hospitality turned cold and callous. Out in the streets, homeless and directionless, I deeply regretted trusting her again. My college experience, meant to be filled with exploration and newfound independence, instead became a survival story. Battling the cruelty of her indifference, I grappled with a harsh reality. It was not just a betrayal, but a calculated breach of trust by someone who should have offered comfort and guidance. With nowhere to turn, I felt the sting of rejection deepen and resolve harden. For over a month, I navigated a world that felt both unfamiliar and unkind, a stark contrast to the supportive family world I once cherished. Friends helped and occasional beds were available, but the experience itself was transformative. It made me realize the critical importance of setting boundaries and not allowing familial ties to dictate my emotional wellness. Instead of breaking me, those challenging times fortified my spirit. I recognized Aunt N's pattern, a constant whirlwind of charm and malice, always seeking personal gain, and never pausing to consider the collateral damage of her actions. She attempted the same reckless routine with my cousins, always dipping into the realm of being the cool aunt, only to turn volatile and destructive when lines were crossed. It became apparent that every interaction with her had the potential to spiral into chaos. Others in the family experienced her antics too, even worse at times. The family gatherings that followed were filled with whispers of her latest drama, tales of her unpredictability, and warnings masked as shared memories. One of my uncles was so entangled in her web that he had to resort to legal protection through a restraining order. Her behavior wasn't isolated or sporadic. It was a consistent theme riddled with betrayal and untrustworthiness. This background helped solidify my decision, and every new episode only bolstered my resolve. It wasn't about anger or spite, but self-preservation and the well-being of those I held dear. I wanted my wedding, our celebration, to reflect joy untainted by anxiety. People like Aunt N thrived on drama and control, and I couldn't afford another such episode. The bygone years were lessons, expensive in emotional cost, and in those lessons, I found clarity. Creating a guest list wasn't just about who I wanted to celebrate with, but also about who I needed to protect myself from. Exclusion wasn't punitive. It was liberating, ensuring that our future began without the echo of past tumultuous exchanges. So, the matter was unequivocal. Aunt N couldn't participate in our celebration of love and unity, not after her history of undermining peace at every turn. Deciding not to invite her was a critical step in taking control of my life narrative, independently crafting a world free from past intimidation. It was an affirmation of choice, respect, and self-care, an emblematic gesture to only indulge in connections that celebrate and uplift. As the wedding day approached, reflecting on these past incidents only cemented my assurance. Experiences with Aunt N, while painful, had fostered strength and courage within me. Our lives are bound by the choices we make, and in this choice I affirmed a life not defined by trauma, but by an empowered, joyful union. Amidst all the wedding chaos, saying I do was more than a declaration to my partner. It was a vow to honor my boundaries unequivocally. Family, bound by blood or chosen bonds, always should uplift and nurture. When it becomes evident that some members are incapable of contributing positively to that ecosystem, one must make the hard decisions, and sometimes excluding is part of maintaining harmony. Each boundary drawn was a promise to myself that only those aligning with the spirit of love, kindness, and joyfulness would share in this pivotal moment. It was a declaration that I firmly stood by, the start of a new chapter, and endless, more certain and hopeful than ever before. The decision was firm, yet I knew Aunt N would not respect it quietly. As expected, she called my mom with what she might have considered an unbreakable resolve. It was almost as if she believed she could bulldoze her way into an invitation with an elaborate sob story. Her narrative went on for over 30 minutes, weaving tales of woe and sorrow aiming to pull at my mom's heartstrings. She was painting herself as the victim, an artist with a palette loaded with emotional manipulation, dipping into remorseful tones and shading in guilt. But my mom, standing resilient, remained unobtrusive. Her calm reflection was a contrast to the tempest of words delivered by Aunt N. She listened throughout the theatrical monologue, and with unwavering calm, she finally suggested that my aunt speaks to me directly. Me, the architect of boundaries, the author of my own invitations. Aunt N balked at the suggestion, quickly attempting to challenge the foundation of this narrative by inquiring about the wedding's financial backers. She envisioned an awkward crack in our resolve that her persistence could exploit. Perhaps my parents were footing the bill, and therefore, she could use this as leverage. But my mom held her ground, calmly revealing that it was my partner and I who were investing in this ceremony completely. Aunt N was left speechless, perhaps flabbergasted. The notion that our wedding was not a traditional ticket, financed through familial obligation, left her at a loss. This revelation unraveled her plans of using them as her entrance strategy. It was most likely that she thought that they were her way in if she managed to guilt-trip them adequately, but the expression of disbelief on the other end of the line was palpable, even through my mother's eyes as she recounted the conversation. Despite my clear stance, Aunt N's reaction to my mother's responses brought about a curious blend of amusement and sadness. She had so often lived within her own narratives that facing this unexpected twist, this unbending decision, seemed to confound her. It was as if she never anticipated that our lives had moved beyond her tales, her manipulations, to draw boundaries stronger than her stories. This conversation, though distant, reverberated through our home as my mother recounted it. It was a reminder of the relentless journey toward a celebration, unmarred by past traumas and household harmony, devoid of tides disrupted by unwelcome intrusions. Aunt N may be family, but that title bore a different interpretation in this context. A new definition marked by respect, not simply relation. As the looming shadow of her potential arrival hovered, I affirmed my trust in our chosen path, promising myself to remain steadfast against her intrusions. It was not just about a wedding invite, it was about the right to a day strategically free from disruptions. Her antics were to be met with a firm, resolute response, defending the sanctity of our celebration, the unwavering line holding our vision for this day intact and gloriously unchanged. When my mother finished recounting her conversation with Aunt N, my father was present in the room, and he quickly chimed in with his perspective. He insisted quite firmly that simply saying no to Aunt N might not suffice. "She has her ways," he warned, stressing that she might still attempt to show up at the wedding even without an invitation, acting as though she were welcomed. I listened intently as he laid out his concerns. In response to his caution, I shared my straightforward plan. If Aunt N decides to make an appearance, she'll be kindly but firmly escorted off the property. I felt a clear resolve in my heart about this decision. This was our day, a milestone shared with loved ones, devoid of unnecessary drama. My soon-to-be husband stood wholeheartedly by my side, supporting my decision with unwavering conviction. The discussion took a more serious turn when my father began to play the role of the diplomatic mediator, suggesting I should take the higher road to avoid letting her presence affect me. "Just ignore her and focus on enjoying your day," he advised, with a sincerity that aimed to shelter me from potential unraveling of plans. But I knew what truly mattered. I calmly countered, explaining that allowing an unwanted guest to stay would be what ruins my day. The thought of needing to maintain peace for someone who disregarded my clear wishes seemed unreasonable. All guests, invited or not, must respect this celebration. Our dialogue was intense, hovering over the delicate line between understanding and persuasion. My father leaned into the notion that refusing to tolerate Aunt N was perhaps a gesture lacking in grace. He saw my firm boundaries in familial terms that he believed warranted flexibility. I presented a different perspective, one that emphasized how presence isn't solely justified by blood relation. His final argument, "That's different, she's family," lingered as we eventually diverged in views. After our discussion, I was left pondering whether upholding these boundaries made me the inconsiderate one in this situation. My father's and my views were left hanging in the air, unresolved. Would standing firm on our day truly label me as the inconsiderate person in the room? I made it clear to my father that having an unwanted guest like Aunt N would indeed ruin my day more than asking her to leave would. My husband is on board with my decision, unwavering in his support. This isn't just about personal comfort. Her presence poses a legal issue due to my uncle's restraining order, which adds gravity to my decision. Yet, in my father's eyes, my actions seem to lack the element of grace, of taking the high ground. I challenged this by questioning if the same logic would mean any random, uninvited person could crash our wedding simply because they felt entitled to do so. His rebuttal was simple. "That's different. She's family." We engaged in what felt like an endless loop of debate, each point countered with another until we were both worn out, without any resolution in sight. It appears that this discussion has stirred more than just temporary discord. It's made me revisit and reassess the boundaries I've set. I want to let go of the unease my father's perspective has brought upon me, yet the question continues to echo. Am I truly the inconsiderate one in this scenario? I'm determined not to let my father's misgivings shake my resolve, as I prioritize a drama-free wedding over societal notions of family obligations. The lingering doubt haunts me, but I trust that my husband and I are making the best choice for our joyous day.